I now welcome Mr Dennis Richardson, Secretary of the Department of Defence, and Rear Admiral Clint Thomas and Mr Christopher Birra from the Department of Defence. Okay. And so for the Hansard record, gentlemen, could you please give your names and the capacity in which you appear today?
Dennis Richardson, appearing in my capacity as Secretary of the Department of Defence.
And Rear Admiral Clint Thomas, appearing in my capacity as the Commander Joint Logistics, recently handed over, but I was the lead in terms of the construction of the deed of licence with the NT Government.
Thank you. Now, I remind Senators that the Senate has resolved that an officer of a Department of the Commonwealth or of the State shall not be asked to give opinions on matters of policy and shall be given reasonable opportunity to refer questions asked of the officer to superior officers or to a minister. This resolution prohibits only questions asking for opinions on matters of policy and does not preclude questions asking for explanations of policies or factual questions about when and how policies were adopted. Officers of the Department are also reminded that any claim that it would be contrary to the public interest to answer a question must be made by a minister and should be accompanied by a statement setting out the basis for the claim. So thank you for appearing before the committee today, and I invite you to make a brief opening statement should you wish to do so.
Thanks very much, Mr Chair. I'll make a few brief opening comments. Clearly, we take our responsibilities in respect of foreign investment and our own input into that seriously. We're paid to look at proposals hard-headedly, and we're paid to look at them unemotionally and to come to and to provide rational advice. In respect to the Port of Darwin, which is the subject of most discussion, any claim that we did not exercise due diligence is based upon ignorance, not on fact. This is an issue which we looked at very, very carefully. Basically, you can, I would, for the convenience of the committee, divide our consideration of the issue up into three parts. The first part, between early 2014, when we were first advised by the Northern Territory Government that they were considering possible privatisation of the port, through to the 13th of May 2015, when we signed a deed of licence with the Northern Territory Government, which specifically related to our own interests in the port, narrowly defined, but also taking into account broader issues. The deed of licence is the most extensive deed of licence that we have with any port in Australia, precisely because the Port of Darwin, as others have indicated, is strategically important, and precisely because of that, we exercise great care with the deed of licence. Our negotiations for the deed of licence was led by Rear Admiral Clint Thomas. It involved other senior people across Defence. It It goes to the point of access. It specifically recognises contingencies and defence's rights in the event of contingencies. It specifically recognises defence emergencies under the Defence Act. It also involves right of inspections. It involves 3 to 4 meetings, formal meetings a year in respect of the operation of the port. And I should also add a point which you might wish to pursue with the Northern Territory representatives later. There is also in the Northern Territory a Utilities Commissioner, which is a regulator who sits over the port operator and who can ultimately determine access in terms of commercial shipping if there is an issue there. We negotiated that deed of licence without regard to who might have the lease or who might buy the port. And therefore we negotiated certain conditions in it which took account of any potential leasee. The second, so that phase took place between early 2014 and the 13th of May 2015. The second phase is really from the 13th of May 2015 to the 15th of September 2015. In that period, potential bidders were identified, narrowed down, and in early July 2015, we were advised by Treasury. We were asked by Treasury to specifically assess Landbridge. At that point in July, the Treasury was of the view that the Landbridge investment would require FIRB approval. Therefore, the Treasury went out to all relevant government departments and agencies as part of a formal FIRB process. It was not until the 15th of September 2015 that Treasury advised that the investment did not require formal FIRB approval, and the request for formal.
Treasury changed their mind.
Well, Treasury advised as they went along that they were still examining the investment proposal, but they asked for formal FIRB. They sent out formal advice in July asking us to make a formal assessment in respect of Landbridge as though it was part of FIRB.
Yeah, sorry,
Through you, Chair, just want to work out the dates. What date did it formally go out?
It went out, again, the Treasury representative will be able to tell you that later on, but it was about the 8th of July.
Right. So I'm just trying to confirm that. So on about the 8th of July.
About the 8th of July.
Treasury said FIRB approval necessary.
That's right. And
but on the
15th of September,
they then said it's not.
It was rescinded. In the meantime, relevant government departments.
Are you
and
aware
agencies,
of why that decision was taken?
Yes.
I appreciate the officers will be here later, but what's your understanding?
Because of the nature of the investment and
being a lease rather than a sale?
Well, they will have to go through that, Senator, but in broad terms, my understanding is it's because of the Foreign Acquisition and Takeover Act of 1976, which excludes FIRB consideration from the sale or lease of state or territory-owned enterprise being sold to a foreign private entity.
Okay, so it was a state asset and therefore FIRB was not required.
Because it was being sold to a foreign private entity. Again, Treasury can go over this with you. They're the experts in this area, not me. The point I'm making is that in July, August, and the first half of September, we went through a formal process in Defence, as did a range of other government departments and agencies, as though it was FIRB required. And we advised the Treasury, after specifically looking at the Landbridge arrangement, that we did not have an objection to it. The third period, I would, from the 15th of September on, I would note that on the 6th of October 2015, the Landbridge arrangement was mentioned at the National Security Committee, and specific attention was drawn to the fact that even if departments and agencies had have objected, there was nothing the Commonwealth would have been able to do about it because of the 1976 Foreign Acquisitions and Takeover Act. As a result of that, the Prime Minister asked the Treasurer and the Attorney General to review that aspect of the legislation to see whether it should be changed. So the initiative to review that part of legislation came from within government, by government. I was in Washington at the time of the announcement by the Northern Territory Government in respect of Landbridge on the 13th of October. I got a phone call around about midnight to advise that the Northern Territory Government had advised that later that day they were going to make a public announcement in respect of Landbridge. I got on to relevant people in Defence to specifically ensure, to confirm that we did not have any issues. And I specifically ensured that certain people, including the Chief of the Navy, were specifically consulted to confirm that our previous advice and position still stood, and that was done. Within 36 hours or so of the announcement, I was having a pre-arranged meeting with the Deputy Secretary of the Department of Defence, Bob Work, and it was about cost-sharing arrangements in respect of the marine presence in Australia. But I used part of the time to brief him on the Landbridge deal, and I drew his specific attention to the fact that it had given rise to the identification of an apparent systemic issue in the legislation which the Prime Minister had asked be reviewed.
Mr. Richardson, was this the first time anyone in the US Defence establishment had been briefed on this?
Well, on Landbridge, yes. I would note that the US had been certainly aware for some time that the Port of Darwin was going to be privatised. I would also note that there was speculation in the Financial Review on the 26th of September or the 28th of September that Landbridge was going to get the lease. But it was the first time the US had been specifically briefed in the manner in which I did it. Following, there followed this is my last point, there followed a lot of public commentary about the Landbridge deal, commentary by ASPI and others, and after a couple of weeks of it, I personally thought, gee, have we missed something? You know, have we, with all our due diligence, have we missed something? So I asked the director of the Defence Intelligence Organisation to get to bring together people from other intelligence agencies to go over this again and to see whether we had missed anything, specifically from an espionage and other perspectives. And the written advice that I received on that was that there were no significant implications and it was fine. So that's the process that we've been through. I might mention two other things that have been stated today. Mr. Jennings mentioned intelligence risks in respect of naval vessels and what they emit. I would like to put on the record that no Australian or American naval vessel that I'm aware of enters a commercial port, whether it be New York, whether it be Sydney, whether it be Shanghai, whether it be London or whether it be Darwin, without turning off key emitters. The notion that you enter a commercial port regardless of the operator and you leave yourself exposed to possible collection is absurd. When you enter a commercial port, you do not know what other shipping is there. You must assume that there may be people seeking to collect things and you take the appropriate steps. So I am surprised that that would be given as an example of one of the intelligence risks. Comments have also been made about this being part of a broader Chinese strategy in relation to, you get references to a string of pearls, Silk Roads and all of this. To the extent that it's commercially based, I think that is a good thing. However, if it's implied in more sinister terms, as did a writer for ASPI, who was at the ANU, Jeff Wade, he wrote a piece on the 18th of November, Sabah, the PLA Navy in Northern Australia, where he talked about an arrangement that had been entered into between the Malaysians and the PLA Navy. And he talked about what China was doing elsewhere, Pakistan, etc., and visits by PLA Navy vessels. And he finished off by saying, and I quote, "In light of these visits and increasing PRC maritime assertiveness, only the most innocent would, on observing the location of Darwin between the South China Sea and the Indian and South Pacific Oceans, conclude that the PLA Navy would not likewise be interested in securing access to and facilities in the Port of Darwin, particularly if it was under the control of a Chinese enterprise for the coming century." That is alarmist nonsense. It is without foundation in any way. Anyone who knows the ABC knows that it is not in the gift of the operator of a port to invite foreign naval vessels to visit. The visit of foreign naval vessels anywhere around the world requires a diplomatic clearance, and that power resides within the federal government. Specifically in Australia, it resides with the Department of Defence, it resides with the Minister for Defence or her delegate. So again, the notion that Landbridge's lease in Darwin somehow or other is part of a broader strategic play by China, and this gives the PLA Navy access to Darwin, is simply absurd. It's simply absurd. It is not factually based. Finally, I would simply note the following.
I'd ask you to
Yeah,
bring
but
it to a close.
but these are important points on which things have been challenged, and I think it's essential that I get the facts on the record.
Sure.
Paul Barnes and Peter Jennings on the 13th of November. In an article they stated, an essential checklist for FIRB evaluation should include assessing the extent to which an element of critical infrastructure, if sold, might risk A, being shut down or sabotaged in a time of heightened tensions. That was addressed. Be subject to cyber attack. That was addressed. Indeed, I specifically sent estimates a few weeks ago that ASD, the Australian Signals Directorate, had been specifically consulted in relation to this lease. So that had been done. Be used as a proxy for intelligence gathering. We did our due diligence on that. Have intellectual property stolen? Well, we did that as far as defence goes. We did that more narrowly. And by asymmetric needs, be used to degrade key elements of Australia's national security system. We did our due diligence on that. Finally, on the 19th of November, Alan Beam, writing for Lowy, said, the issue was essentially one of control. How are access priorities set? How are berth and mooring allocations decided? Do particular cargoes, carriers or trade destinations have priority? How are port charges levied? How are improvements treated at the end of the lease? There are myriad questions that should be dealt with before a major strategic asset is removed from Australia's direct control. All of that was addressed, Mr. Chairman. In summary, we did our due diligence very carefully over an extended period of time in respect to the Port of Darwin. Nothing that has been said since the announcement has given us pause for thought.
Thank you, Mr. Richardson. Senator Conroy.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to come back to the timeline for a moment. Why were you in Washington on the 13th of October? Why were you in Washington?
There had been a meeting in Osmin. A meeting of Osmin in Boston, either that day or the day before.
So what were the dates of the
Osmin? Osmin, I think, was the 12th of October, but I stand to be corrected. It was either the 12th or the 13th of October.
No, so the 12th in Boston.
Yes, yep.
And so Osmin had finished.
Yes.
And you went on to Washington.
Yes.
Okay. And which American officials, defence officials, were present at Osmin?
At Osmin there was Secretary Carter, and there was the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs. No, sorry. I think the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, and there are a number of other officials whose name I just forget.
So Mr. I'm just trying to think of the name of the gentleman you mentioned that you spoke with in Washington.
Bob Work.
Bob Work.
He was the Deputy Secretary. He was not there.
He wasn't in Boston?
No, no.
Okay. Now, time differences were about a day ahead.
Yeah, roughly. Yep.
In Australia.
Yep.
So when you got the phone call the evening of the 13th of October, Washington time.
Yep.
What time was it in Australia?
No, it was either. It could have been the evening of the. It could have been It could have been the evening of the 12th. I'm just not quite sure. I got the call around about 12:30 at night.
On one of those evenings, you were in Boston,
yeah.
and in one of those evenings, you were in Washington. They're two very distinct, different places.
I know that.
And so you received the phone call in Washington.
I received the phone call in
you
Washington.
Weren't in Boston on the previous evening. Sorry, you weren't in Washington the previous evening. You've just described you went after the completion of Osmond to
That's
Washington.
Right. That's
so
right.
the night before, presumably, you were in Boston.
On the night of the 11th. No. I think you'll find the announcement was on the 13th, was it? Australian time? 13th of October? Australia time? Yes. Yep, is that right? Yep. So the announcement was made by the Northern Territory Government on the 13th of October. Yep. If the announcement was made on the 13th of October...
Which is still the 12th
That would make it
Boston.
the evening of the 12th in Washington. Because the meeting, we went up to Washington the same day as Osmond.
Yeah, no, after it concluded, you said
After
you
it
went.
concluded, yeah.
And so you received the phone call around midnight.
That's right, that's right.
On the 13th in Washington.
Yes, 13th Canberra time, I was in Washington.
Sorry, no, that's what I'm trying to ascertain.
Yeah.
When you say you received it midnight,
yeah.
It was midnight in Washington or midnight in Canberra?
No, midnight in Washington.
Okay. And that was the first you knew of the decision to appoint Landbridge, even though you had been vetting them?
No, it was the first time I was aware that an announcement was going to be made.
But you knew that Landbridge had one prior to then, presumably?
Yes. Well, I assumed. I assumed they were the. I had assumed that from discussions I had in Australia in October.
Cool.
I can't say I knew as of fact, but I certainly assumed that.
Yeah. Cool. Okay, thank you. Now, you mentioned earlier that you had done your due diligence on the questions around sabotage.
Yep.
What does that involve?
That involves, that involves consultation with the Australian Signals Directorate. I think ASIO were separately approached by the Treasury, and of course they have statutory responsibility in that area. It involved consultation with the Australian Defence agencies, and it involved consultation with the three armed services. And then, as I said, after it became public and there was a lot of criticism of it, I became concerned that we might have missed something. So as a backstop, I specifically tasked the Director of the Defence Intelligence Agencies to bring together some people from different parts of the intelligence community to make sure we had not missed anything.
Could I ask what prompted your concern that you might have missed
Well,
something?
I was reading this string of criticism, and people are entitled to their views. I respect Peter Jennings.
You've told us that you did a very thorough due diligence. So, having done a thorough due diligence, why would you form the view?
Well, why wouldn't I? I mean, I'm a rational person. I respect Peter Jennings. I respect other people. We make a decision. We've gone through a due diligence. It's heavily criticised, Why wouldn't a rational person pause and say, well, look, have we got this right? Have we missed something? That's what I did.
So,
Yep, no worries. Now, I just want to go back to the issue of sabotage. Are we talking about concerns that a bomb could disable the port? What are the issues around sabotage?
No, well, not a bomb would disable the issue of a bomb is an issue that goes beyond a lease operator.
So what is the concept of sabotage that you investigated when it comes to the operation of a port?
Well, concept of sabotage. Is there capability, is there activity that could be compromised as a result of the lease operator? Intelligence gathering was, I think, more of a focus than sabotage. And what opportunity for intelligence gathering would Landbridge lease provide to the Chinese over and above the intelligence gathering opportunities they would have in any case? You need to work that through very, very carefully, and we did that.
No, so I was going to come to intelligence, but I wanted to stick with the sabotage. The capacity to disable the operations of the port.
The principle, far more of a focus on intelligence gathering than sabotage. Simply because, because intelligence gathering is a higher risk in normal circumstances than actual sabotage, particularly given that when Australian naval vessels visit any commercial port, regardless of the port operator, whether they visit Sydney, whether they visit Melbourne or whatever, if they're visiting a commercial port, they take certain precautions in relation to the security of the vessel.
Okay. Now, I just wanted to. I'm hoping you can explain. I'm not in any way an expert on a port and how it operates. If you want to disable the facility.
What facility?
The port facility.
Yeah.
What would you be looking for as a danger sign that the port could be disabled, made to not work efficiently, correctly, or not work at all? Wanted to understand about, would a bomb go off? Could it have been planted? But what are the other ways that you would want to protect the capacity to sabotage? I'm just conscious of the Bureau of Met's just been penetrated, and that's a hack. But
there are security requirements in relation to sensitive areas of ports around Australia, and people working in certain parts of ports around Australia require a security clearance, which is vetted by ASIO. So there are a range of layers that you have.
So no Chinese nationals could be at a point of critical decision making. Under the agreement that you've reached. I'm just seeking to understand what you've put in place.
Any Chinese national working at the port in Darwin would require a visa and would require a security clearance. So you do your due diligence in that context.
Yeah. So many automated processes now have been digitised.
Yes.
And in the same way, the Bureau of Met's just been hacked badly, you might think, well, why would anyone want to bother hacking the weather report? So I'm trying to understand the degree of ability to render a report less efficient, less operable through an incapacity through software tampering.
Well, something like that.
Which doesn't have to be a hack by definition if the owners
sure.
are the ones who actually do it.
Yeah, but something, well, I'd make a couple of points to that. First of all, whoever got into the Bureau of Meteorology didn't have a lease on the building and didn't employ people, but they were still able to do it. That is one of the risks you carry in terms of cyber penetration, which a lot of people forget.
But it'd be a heck of a lot easier if they did own that building or were running it.
I will make no comment on that, except that that is not the way the world now works.
Well, as I said, I'm seeking to understand that there is no capacity to disable the port.
I'm just saying you don't need to own a physical structure in order to engage in cyber penetration.
No, I totally understand and get that.
Yeah, and your protections in respect of cyber attack are helped by physical security, quite clearly. Physical security does help that. However, your most important defences are the cyber defences, not your physical defence.
But if the owner
Yep.
is the perpetrator,
Sure.
it must be an awful lot easier if you actually own the system to sabotage the system than to hack it from a building in Beijing.
Of course. Of course.
But I just wanted to make sure that we were on the same page.
Yeah, but Senator, then you've got to be rational and you've got to keep going down that path. You just can't stop there and leave that up in the air. If you keep pursuing that down the path, there are some things you can do. There are some things you can't do. However, a port operator would be unlikely to be sabotaging the port that they make money out of in a vacuum. That's hardly likely to happen.
I'm not
today.
suggesting we're talking about a circumstance that would be, as you describe it, a vacuum.
There would be a build-up. There would be the development of an environment, and you can take steps as you move along.
Senator Conroy.
I'm happy to pass over to someone else.
Senator Canavan, do you have any questions?
Well, look, I've been out of the room, so I apologise if.
If you want to.
I do have a couple, but if my questions are repetitive, please let me know, and I can read transcripts. I wanted to ask, in your assessment of this proposed or now concluded arrangement. I mean, did you look to overseas and other countries about arrangements with ports there? I mean, is there another example of a port being privately owned where our Navy or the US Navy use as a facility?
Virtually every port that us and the US Navy visit is owned by someone, whether
of course,
it be privately
but obviously
owned
many
or
ports
whatever.
are government owned. But
there are privately owned ports around the world.
Well, I've just asked, did you look at that in this analysis?
No, we didn't. We were able to make this. We're aware of other instances. I mean, Dubai ports were mentioned earlier on. I was ambassador to Washington at the time of Dubai Port, and I can tell you that was anything but a rational process. And indeed, a decision had been taken to sell it to Dubai ports, and it became a big political issue. And
Mr. Richardson, you said
it ended up being a political decision rather than any other sort of decision.
Mr. Richardson, you did say earlier that that I did hear while I was in the room that it doesn't really matter who owns the port. That we can manage our security needs without having to own the port. I'm just sort of trying to get to the bottom of how you came to that conclusion if you didn't look at the arrangements that exist elsewhere in the world.
Well, first of all, we have lots of experience around the world.
Yep.
It's the first thing. So we don't have to make inquiries. We have a Navy that visits overseas regularly. We have a Navy that is very familiar with what it needs and what the security arrangements need to be in respect of the visit by its vessels. So we have that expertise in-house. In terms of our own intelligence agencies, we are consulting regularly with our partners in respect of intelligence gathering and the like. We didn't need to specifically consult in relation to Darwin Port, given the range of consultative arrangements we have across government and across different and with a range of countries.
Is there another?
Yeah, sure, please.
Sorry,
please.
Can I just add something? Admiral Clint Thomas. Certainly, we are aware, as the Secretary said, we're well aware of many other, particularly our key allies, and their organic arrangements where they own a section of a port. But our assessment is this, the deed of licence that we constructed in Darwin far exceeds any of our key allies in a commercial port.
Could you just repeat that? I just couldn't quite hear you.
We believe that it far exceeds our key allies and their relationships with a port in preparation for a privatised port.
I apologise. What far exceeds? What's the element?
The deed of licence that
the deed of licence. Oh, sorry,
the deed
that's
of
the bit I
licence,
missed.
which
Okay,
is
sorry.
effectively our Department of Defence
Yep.
arrangement that we struck over an extended period of time with the Northern Territory Government.
Okay. I mean, is there another example where the US Navy has an ongoing use of a port which is owned by a company, or leased in this case, of course, but
Look, I need to take this on notice, but there would be...
Sorry, could I just finish my question?
Tens of
leased of by a company connected to the Chinese government.
Well, I can advise that the Chinese Navy has at times been in situ at Changi Naval Base in Singapore at the same time as PLA submarines have been visiting.
That wasn't quite my question though, Mr. Richardson.
But I'm just making a
sure.
point.
Okay. Can I just return to my question? Is there another example where the US Navy has an ongoing need and use of a port in the world which is owned by a company connected to the Chinese government?
We would need to take that on notice.
I presume some of this next question may have been asked by Senator Conroy, so same proviso applies if it has been asked, let me know. You're obviously asked to provide advice on the arrangements. Given the US Navy's interests and given there was obviously at least a prima facie reason why you were asked, why didn't you ask the US military for US Defence Force for their views?
Well, we certainly didn't need to consult. As I've stated publicly, it would have been the sensible thing to do to advise them in advance. That was an oversight for which I take responsibility, no one else. The US was certainly aware that the Port of Darwin was going to be privatised. It was public knowledge.
Yep.
I would also note that the financial review on the 26th of September or the 28th of September of this year reported that Landbridge was going to get the lease of the Port of Darwin. Now, that's no excuse for not advising them in advance. That was an oversight which I have publicly acknowledged.
Okay. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Senator Fong.
Thank you. I've got a number of questions. I just want to put this to you, Mr. Richardson. There was, in February, a Defence Submission to Parliament's Public Works Committee stated, quote, Darwin is strategically vital for supporting ADF maritime operations across Australia's northern approaches, particularly mounting operations that involve the Navy's amphibious capability.
That's right. That is absolutely right.
Right. So that's pretty axiomatic.
It is absolutely accurate, which is why we took great care with the deed of licence, and it's why we took great care in looking at Landbridge.
Can I ask you about the deed of licence? And it's publicly available, I take it?
No.
It's not publicly available. Do we know broadly the terms of that deed of licence?
We
You've told us
can
you've
talk about
negotiated it at length.
Yep.
Is that something you'd be prepared to provide to the committee in confidence?
We can answer whatever questions you want to put to us in respect to the deed of licence.
It's a bit difficult to ask without seeing the primary document. It puts us at a disadvantage.
No, it is a commercial in confidence document, but we're very happy to provide.
And you're aware
briefings.
of the powers of committees to request documents if he thinks it's necessary in order to undertake its inquiry?
I would need to take that on notice in terms of the government, but we're very happy.
It's a commercial in confidence document. That's the primary. That's the primary consideration. So therefore, public interest immunity wouldn't apply to such a document.
Look, Senator, I'm just not an expert in those areas. I'm sure you are.
I'm not suggesting I am. I thought you'd be more an expert than me.
Suggest here that if the concern is in relation to public disclosure, that the document can be provided to us.
I would then seek advice, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Well, can I put to you, Chair, I think it's very important that we see that deed of licence because much has been made of it in the context of this inquiry.
Sure.
And I think it's important that we see it.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yes, so if you can come back to us on that.
because I think it does raise those issues. Now, I'm just trying to understand in terms of the issue of due diligence, and Mr. Richardson, you were fortunate enough to be in Washington at the time of the Dubai Port deal when that was knocked back. I think the Bush administration agreed to the deal. It was knocked back by Congress effectively.
That's right.
And it went through a fairly tortuous process through the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States, which was in fact set up by Gerald Ford in 1975 post-OPEC, or flexing of OPEC's powers. Is it your view that blocking of the Dubai Ports deal was a political rather than a strategic decision?
Look, I won't say any more than what I've already said on that, Senator.
Right.
I was there at the time, and it was something of a firestorm, I would describe it. I think it broke on a Sunday.
Okay. So you said in your evidence today that we consult regularly with our partners. We did need to consult in relation to the Port of Darwin lease, although we have a situation here where the President of the United States raised it with our Prime Minister, the fact that it appeared to be a concern, if not an admonishment, that we weren't told, that the United States was not told about the transaction. That seems to be a fair characterisation of the matters raised by the United States President.
Yeah, Senator, if I can say a couple of things on that. First of all, any criticism that we should have, just as a matter of common sense, advised the US in advance, I think is fair criticism.
And I think Richard Armitage also made comments along those lines as well, didn't he?
As I've said, I think that's fair criticism. And I take accountability for that, right? So I can't do any more than that. Secondly, I would also note that the US does have an embassy in Australia. And I know something about the responsibilities of embassies. And I would assume that given the fairly extensive coverage in parts of the Australian media, particularly in the Northern Territory, of the proposed privatisation of the port, that the US would have been aware of the fact that it was going to be privatised. Indeed, I'm aware that they were advised of the proposed privatisation. They were not advised, however, of Landbridge, and I believe it would have been the sensible thing to have given them prior advice of that.
But notwithstanding the role of embassies, you can't outsource the responsibility of the Australian Government or the Department of Defence in respect to these particular matters, can you?
It's a two-way thing, Senator. If the shoe was on the other foot and I was the Australian ambassador to Washington, I don't think you would be accepting that it was the responsibility of the US. You'd be pointing your finger at me as the ambassador, and why wasn't I up with what was happening publicly in the country to which I'm accredited?
Yes, but okay.
I'm just making the point. It is not quite a black and white thing.
Look, it's a circular argument. What I'm trying to understand, and the point that's been raised by Mr. Jennings and others at ASB, they're just trying to establish what information was requested of the Northern Territory Government and what information was imparted by the Northern Territory Government in relation to this deal once it was emerged that Landbridge was was the front runner or was the bidder, the successful bidder for the port.
Well, two issues here, Senator.
Sorry, can I just clarify it so that's not out of context? What Mr. Jennings said, he said it was unclear as to what the interaction was. In other words, what questions were asked and answered in the context of this. So I just want to be fair to Mr. Jennings.
First of all, as I mentioned earlier in my intro, there was a period between early 2014 and 13th of May 2015 when the question of privatisation was on the table, and it was in that context that we negotiated a deed of licence, which you've inquired about. I'm very happy to provide a briefing on that, and I'll follow up in terms of providing a copy. That specifically looked at the question of, one, our access; secondly, our powers in the event of a contingency; thirdly, our powers under the Defence Act; fourthly, it had reference to security; and finally, it concerns governance arrangements in terms of our own interests and equities. Landbridge came into play, as said, they were one of the potential bidders, and we were specifically asked to look at Landbridge by Treasury in early July of this year. And it was in that context that we then looked specifically at Landbridge, leaving aside the deed of licence. We looked specifically at Landbridge, and it's in that context that we consulted the three services. We consulted the Australian Signals Directorate. We consulted the Australian Security Agency, the Defence Security Agency. And it's also in that context that Treasury consulted a range of other departments and agencies, including ASIO.
So I just want, because I'm concerned about time, if you can just rush through this. I would like to know, and I'm sure some of my colleagues would like to know, the nature of the questions asked, the extent of the answers given in respect of that, because you say that due diligence was carried out in respect of this, but you do acknowledge that there needs to be a change in the framework because the current legislative framework does not allow for scrutiny of deals of the sale of key infrastructure by state and territory governments.
Two issues are separate, Senator. They're linked, but they're separate. The most certainly acknowledge that gap in the law, which has existed since 1976, needs to be pursued, and the Parliament will no doubt make its own decision on that.
But you acknowledge, though, Mr. Richardson, that because of the controversy around this deal, it seems that there will be changes to the Foreign Investment Review Framework, as announced by, it's being looked at by the Treasury, is it not?
And as I advised in my opening statement, the government initiated a review of that before Landbridge became public.
But he was aware of Landbridge, presumably, at the time.
Yes, but it was not because of the... It's simply a matter of fact that it's not because of the public controversy and public commentary that the Foreign Investment, Foreign Acquisition Takeovers Act 1976 is being reviewed.
But it
It's
initiated
because of Landbridge.
It initiated the inquiry when it became aware of Landbridge prior.
That's right.
So maybe the government was being prescient, at least, in respect of that.
Well, it highlighted, as you rightly say, Senator, it highlighted the fact that even if we had have had concerns, there wouldn't have been anything we could have done about it.
So, and I think this will have to be my last question.
Yeah.
The Chair's been very patient with me. In terms of the Port of Darwin, the sale or lease
Yep.
of the Port of Fremantle, does that mean that deal will be looked at differently in the context of what has occurred in respect to the Port of Darwin?
Well, not from the perspective of defence. We will look at Fremantle in the same way as we looked at Darwin. It's not going... What's happened in respect of Darwin and the controversy there is irrelevant in terms of what we will do in respect of Fremantle.
But there could well be a different framework if the government...
But that is a matter for the government and the parliament.
And when could you let us know about the deed of licence?
We can let you know about that pretty quickly, Senator. If it's okay, if it was agreeable to the committee, I would see whether it would be possible to sit down with the committee with a copy of the deed of licence to go through, and you can have it. In terms of providing a copy permanently to the committee, I would have some hesitation on that, but I will certainly make every effort to see whether the committee can't get the access that you legitimately require in order to do your job.
Although there are rules about the confidentiality of documents that are quite strict.
Sure.
Now, Senator Wish-Wilson, do you have any questions?
Yes, Chair.
Just noting the time, if we could try to get them down to the important ones.
Yeah, Chair, and maybe perhaps you could put me first next time for questions so that we don't have this problem. Could I ask Mr Richardson, you've provided some rational explanations, to use your own words, as to why you didn't have concerns. Could you explain why the US had concerns, or was it just their initial reaction to not being advised or consulted?
No, look, I hesitate to speak on behalf of the US. I would simply note that nothing that has been said to us by any US official would give us pause for thought in terms of our decision in respect of Landbridge.
Okay, well that was going to be my next question. Have they raised any specific issues with you following your meeting with them in the US? It doesn't sound like it.
There were some issues raised, all of which I believe we're able to address, as has been stated by the US Ambassador.
Okay, that's fine for me. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Senator Conroy, I think you have a few further questions.
I'm sorry to labour some of this, but I'm confused, and I don't like being confused. So it's just after 11 a.m. on the 15th of November right now, here in Australia.
Yeah.
The time in New York, Washington, Boston is about 7 p.m. on the 14th of November, the day behind us.
Yep.
And if it was midnight in Washington right now, it would be 4 p.m. in the afternoon here in Australia.
Yep.
And assuming midnight's moving into the 15th. So you said you received the phone call at midnight in Washington. I appreciate
I said around midnight.
No, I'm appreciating that there is a time difference
Yep.
because it's daylight saving, kicks in
Yep.
both directions, going back to
Yep.
then. But I don't think it changes the substance of what
Sure.
I'm trying to understand. So if you received the call about midnight around,
Yep.
and then there's daylight saving, so I appreciate that it's not quite an exact science. If you received the call in Washington of midnight of the 13th,
Around midnight.
around midnight of the 13th.
No,
which
no. I think it was.
because Osmin was on the 13th.
No.
In Boston. You then travelled to Washington that afternoon, and you received the call in Washington
That's
that
right.
night.
That's
so
right.
that's the 13th in Washington. Well, Osmin was on the 13th. You moved. It wasn't on the 12th. It wasn't on the.
Well, whenever it was.
Yeah, it was the
Yeah.
13th. I can show. I've got here the remarks with Secretary of Defence Ash Carter, Australian Foreign Minister, Australian Defence Minister Maurice Payne, Boston, Massachusetts, October the 13th.
Right.
Okay, so we're clear.
Yep.
So midnight in Washington on the 13th of October
Yep.
is the 14th in Australia.
Yep.
The press release issued by the media coverage for the announcement
Yep.
was so the Fin Review ran the story in Australia on the 13th of October at 6 p.m.
Mm-hmm.
That makes it the 12th of October that, if you like, the story would have broken in the US if anyone had been watching, because it's the day before on the timelines.
Whenever.
So
Yep.
it's announced in Australia on the 13th. That's the 12th of October in America. You're in Boston on the 12th of October.
I received the phone call when I was in Washington.
Yes.
I was staying at the Jefferson Hotel, and I was speaking to Chris Brewer, who's sitting behind
I'm
me.
not doubting any of that. I'm just trying to clarify the timeline.
Yep.
Okay? Because there's about a 24-hour gap here
Yep.
that doesn't make sense to me, and that's
Sure.
what I'm trying to understand.
Yep.
So it's announced in the Australian press on the 13th of October. It's up online at 6 p.m. on the 13th of October. It's the 12th of October. So I'm trying to understand. Now, you've said you didn't speak with any of those senior officials, Ash Carter or any of the other officials at Osmin,
Yep.
even though what looks like, and I'm happy for this to be corrected, what looks like the announcement was actually prior to Osmin, American time. You may not have been notified. I'm accepting absolutely that you may not have been notified. Your first phone call was midnight in Washington on the 13th.
Yeah.
You then briefed sorry, I keep forgetting his name.
Work.
Sorry. Presumably you didn't phone him at midnight in Washington. You waited till you saw him the next day at a pre-arranged meeting. So that's the 14th in Washington, because it's midnight the 13th you received the call. So you saw him the next day?
I think I saw him on the 14th or the 15th
Yeah.
of October.
So let's assume it was the 14th, just
Sure.
sequentially. That may have been the 15th. I'm not trying to pin
Yep.
you to that. So I'm trying to understand, on the 14th, that was the first the US knew about it.
About Landbridge, yes.
And you did not raise it with anybody at Osmin on the 13th?
I didn't,
in
no.
Boston?
No,
Did you
I
attend all the meetings with Minister Payne?
I attended her meetings, but there were obviously occasions when Minister
You didn't let her
Payne
wander off
and
by herself,
Secretary
did you?
Carter,
You didn't let her wander off by herself?
Senator,
I'm teasing, it's all right.
there
Senator
obviously
Richardson.
would be occasions where Minister Payne and Secretary Carter were speaking privately and together and were none of my business.
But accept that. So you're confident that the American administration, you notified them, you were the first person to notify them, and you weren't present when Minister Payne advised them.
Senator, I didn't say I'm confident that I was the first person to notify the US. I simply advised you of when I spoke to the US.
Did you tell the minister when you received the phone call? It's midnight or around midnight. You didn't phone the minister and say, "Hey, this has happened."
I didn't need to.
You didn't need to.
No.
Why not?
Well, it was what
I'm not saying you should have phoned her at midnight. I'm just asking.
But why
you didn't
would
phone her
I?
in the morning?
I wasn't going to ring someone up at. Wake them
I'm
up.
accepting that there's no need to make a phone call at midnight of
yeah.
something of it. But did you tell her the next day?
Oh yes.
Did she say, "Oh, I already knew about that," Mr. Richardson?
What? Sorry.
Did the minister say, "It's okay, I already knew about that"?
I can't recall precisely the precise words we exchanged.
But you did tell her.
Oh yes.
You're not aware that Minister Payne discussed it at Osmin the day before?
I'm not aware. No.
But from what it sounds like to me, Minister Payne didn't say to you, "Oh, it's all right, Mr. Richardson, Dennis, I already know about that."
Know about
the Landbridge decision.
I think by the next morning she might have been aware of the public announcement.
Because I'm trying to understand why it's claimed that Minister Payne did discuss the matter with her counterparts at Osmin.
I don't know whether, has Minister Payne said that?
I'm trying to understand why it's claimed that that's the case.
And by whom?
The Foreign Minister.
Well, I can't speak for the Foreign Minister.
But it's claimed that Minister Payne spoke to counterpart ministers at Osmin. But you're not aware of that at all?
I can't speak on behalf of the two ministers.
But you were present in most of the meetings where this might have come up?
No, Senator, I would say this, and I think this is very important to get this precise. I was present for the duration of Osmin. As you know through your own personal experience as a minister, in a meeting like that, there are a range of occasions when ministers are talking to their direct counterparts without the presence of officials, over coffee, over lunch, whatever. So it would be wrong to suggest that I was present in the company of the two ministers on every occasion when it is possible. They might have talked about other things.
But by definition, as you only found out at midnight after you'd left Osmin, you didn't brief Minister Payne during or before Osmin about the Landbridge decision?
Not about the... Senator, again, two things here. We're talking about the public announcement by the Northern Territory. As I said before, it was evident before that it was Landbridge. I mentioned to you the discussion that had taken place at the NSC on the 6th of October. So clearly both ministers would have been aware in respect of Landbridge.
When was leadership change?
Of what?
I can't remember the exact date.
Of what?
The Prime Minister, the new Prime Minister.
I don't know. It was mid-September, I think, but okay. I can't tell you precisely when.
Okay, so, but by definition, as you were only informed at midnight after you'd left Osmin,
of the public announcement.
Yeah, no, we've accepted you were not vaguely, I mean, that's not the right description, that you, because of your involvement in the process, you were familiar with the likely outcome, though you said earlier you didn't have a formal...
Certainly by Osmin, we were familiar, well, the assumption was it was Landbridge.
No, I said,
Yeah.
I think you indicated that without anyone formally telling you
That's
that
right.
it was, yep, definitely, you'd come to the conclusion
That's right, that's
logically through the discussions
That's
you'd
it.
had. But you didn't provide any brief to the Minister going into OSMIN to advise.
No.
Yep, that's what I'm trying to ascertain.
No.
And then your first formal knowledge of the announcement.
Yep.
So when you saw Mr. Work,
Yep.
did he say, "It's all right, Mr. Richardson, I already know about it"?
Oh no, we had a meeting already set up to discuss cost sharing arrangements in relation to the Marines. As a result of the announcement, I suggested through the embassy that we should also discuss Darwin.
That was the next morning, as we've
Yes,
agreed.
that's right, that's right.
The morning of the 14th.
That's right,
The day
that's right.
after OSMIN.
That's right.
So they knew you were coming to, I understand how these things work, both
Yep,
sides
yep.
sort of say, here's the agenda, anything we both want on, etc. So you notified them that it would be on the agenda for the meeting of the 14th or 15th?
and they wanted it on the agenda also.
I'm sure they did by then.
Yeah.
So when you went to that meeting, Mr. Work would have been aware of the decision because you'd requested that it be placed on the agenda.
That's right, precisely.
So he would have looked it up by then. So when you went in and sat down with him,
Yep.
it wasn't like you were breaking the news to him
That's right.
on the spot because you'd
That's
already
right.
advised that should be added to the agenda.
That's right, that's right.
But he was, Mr. Work indicated they were unaware up until the announcement and you'd notified them. I mean, you've indicated,
That's
you told
right,
them,
that's right.
you were the first to tell them, and I accept the point you make. You've taken responsibility. I'm not being in any way pejorative.
Yeah,
You've
sure.
taken responsibility. You should have advised them
Yep.
earlier. I
The-
accept that.
Yeah, I was the first to advise them, Senator, in respect of the FIRB issue. In respect of the FIRB issue.
Yep. So you've got no idea why the Foreign Minister would claim that Minister Payne briefed or discussed the matter with her counterparts at OSMIN?
As I said, I certainly wasn't present on all occasions with the two ministers.
But when you were present, there was no discussion. You hadn't asked it to be listed on the agenda for OSMIN. It wasn't part of a formal brief, as you've just described.
That's right.
When you're going to have a conversation about
That's
these
right.
things, you put them on the agenda first. It wasn't on the agenda at OSMIN. You weren't aware that it was raised at OSMIN. You weren't aware that Minister Payne raised it at any point that you were present.
It was not formally on the agenda. Issues can be discussed informally, which are not on the agenda, and that sometimes does happen. I simply can't be drawn into what either of the two ministers may or may not have discussed with their counterparts.
But by definition, you weren't there. You can't say if it was or it wasn't.
That's right.
But you didn't brief the Minister
No.
to raise it.
No.
Okay. I might have to wind it up there, Senator Conroy. Thank you. And thank you very much, Mr Richardson and Rear Admiral Thomas. Just in terms of the answers to questions on notice, we're looking at the 11th of January 2016 as the time when answers are due. And so, look, the committee is running over time, but we recognise the importance of having a brief break. So I'm suggesting that we have a 5-minute break and resume at...
The witnesses are now released.
And the witnesses are now, yes, you are
And
released.
Mr Chair, we'll come back to you this afternoon in relation to the deed of licence, because I know you want to do this inquiry in pretty tight time, so we'll do that quickly.
But if the only consideration was commercial and confidence, presumably some of the, I guess we can work out, you can point what your particular concerns were.
We just need to get certain approvals, Senator.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, look, we will take a break until 11:30, and I do apologise to our friends at ASIO and for the delay there.